Planning, organizing, leading, and controlling.
Okay.
My background, and it only matters just because the idea of a discussion forum. My background was, before UT, was 18 years in hotel management and development. And so at various times, well, I started out as an entry-level manager after I graduated from UT undergrad. And just had, less than 10 employees. And then when I was a general manager at the largest hotel I was at, as far as people that I don't want to say directly because some of it was indirect, but over 200 employees at a hotel that we opened in downtown Chattanooga. So started out with a handful where I could actually drive around probably in a minivan and have a full meeting, to a couple of hundred where it was actually really kind of difficult to get even the majority of them at a single room at a single time. And then a lot of in between all that over the years. Most of that in hotel and restaurant management. And then I had my one entrepreneurial experience was something called Rocky Top Books, which was down on Cumberland Avenue. We opened it in the summer of '98, and then we sold it in the spring of 2000. So it was about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And that feeds into this a little bit in a minute. But so that's been my experience. And then the last, 19 years now has been at UT, which is still a big bureaucratic organization that still has top level managers, middle managers, and then frontline supervisor level managers as well. So we have the whole rainbow of managers at UT as well. We're just a bureaucracy, and people don't think of us as and especially an academic one, and people don't think of us as having managers, and especially middle managers. But we do. Any big organization will, whether it's a nonprofit or higher ed or actual full-on for-profit corporation. So what's your background been like?
I'm doing real estate out in Los Angeles right now. So I have a manager for that job, but I've never been a manager in any type.
Yeah, which for a college student's not unusual. I mean, most of us, including me, most of us never really had the opportunity to do that while we were still students.
Yeah. But I've been talking to my grandpa a little bit about this class because he was a manager at Nestle.
Yeah.
He had a lot of, he's been really helpful. I've been talking to him about, it seems like a lot of it, there's more of an importance on like relationship skills and people skills than I thought there was.
Yeah, very true. And that weaves through a lot of the chapters. There's 2 or 3 chapters, especially the HR one, where it digs into that deep, and the leadership one too, which makes sense. Yeah. And I've thought a lot about that and the interpersonal side over the years, because to be a better manager, some of that really is looking at ourselves, and some of it really is self-critical and has to do with being a better person, not just to be a better person, but to become a better manager too.
Yeah.
But I have worked with a handful of people who were they didn't play well with others, and just very abrasive, unpleasant people. And and the only reason I bring it up, we're still very effective managers. And somehow their total lack of interpersonal skills was just overcome by their strategy, their tactical execution, and just their drive, probably more than anything else. And I guess we've all heard of people like that too, but have been around some, and you may have been too, where on the leadership part of planning, organizing, leading, and controlling, in a lot of ways, the interpersonal part of leadership, they definitely failed on. The manager part of leadership, that's about managing inanimate objects, managing resources, managing money and time, and even production lines, that kind of thing, this guy excelled at. But with people, it was just difficult. It was actually a little painful to watch.
Really?
Yeah. So
we
had good
technical skills, but not good personal skills, pretty much.
No.
Yeah.
And not surprisingly, very, very, very smart. there are certain people that are always convinced they're the smartest person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
This guy was convinced of that, and I think he was probably right most of the time. He probably was the smartest person in the room, which is part of what made him so unpleasant too, because he knew it. Yeah. So, but that's an outlier. For the rest of us, mere mortals, the interpersonal part, you're right, is just huge. Being able to communicate, being able to listen and have empathy and sympathy for your bosses and for those reporting to you. It sounds great on paper, but in the 60th hour of an 80-hour week for anybody, it becomes a lot harder to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
So I had a question about my workplace. I have my uncle's like the manager, the head of the company, and then he's more on like the personal skills, like human skills, and then there's another, would it be called a co-manager? They kind of share the same title, and he's more of the technical skills, and my uncle does like the personal, like getting investors and stuff, and then
mhm,
the other guy Maury is just like he's the numbers guy, but they're both like the heads of the company, the
yeah,
managers.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it a lot of times this has a specific legal meaning, but it also covers what you're talking about too, although it may be the case with that as well. But managing partners, where they're both the heads of the company and they are it, but they share that leadership in terms of who's going to be the operational tactical quant person, and then who's going to be the shaking hands and kissing babies
Yeah, that's exactly how.
extrovert.
Yeah.
Yep. Interesting how often that happens with successful small companies, and sometimes they get bigger, sometimes they just stay successful with small companies. But two people with really complementary skills and personalities come together and create a company where it takes both of their sets of skills kind of equally
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do what they do. They've got to have the quant side, and the trains have to run on time, but they've got to be able to interact with people smoothly and without hesitation, which is hard for some people.
Yeah, for sure.
Was your grandfather at Nestle after they had moved the headquarters to Los Angeles?
Yeah, he actually he lived. I actually had to go over to the Nestle building to do some research because my uncle was looking at some apartments over there. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I sent him a picture of the building, and he was like, "Yeah, that's my old stomping grounds."
That's
So
great.
yeah, but yeah, he had to move all around. He lived in Australia for a period of time for Nestle, and then Miami, and then LA. Yeah,
That's amazing.
he went to Tennessee too. He's a huge Vols fan.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, I think at the moment for consumer packaged goods companies, and it may be food and beverage, but I think it's overall consumer packaged goods. Nestle's still the third largest in the world,
Yeah.
and just huge. And that's after Procter and Gamble's still at number one. I think Unilever's still at number two. I think Nestle's at three.
Yeah.
But wow, what an amazing company!
Yeah. No, it's an awesome company for sure.
It really is.
Yeah. But it was interesting too. It was kind of like I've been looking at like the people in my office and then talking to my grandpa who's like, yeah, you're really never off the clock. Like he had like a lot of people to oversee and manage, and he was always like, you know, and I told him, like, you're kind of lucky you got in, he was a manager for like 20 years, and he kind of got out before all the social media stuff hit. So
Hmm.
yeah, I told him that would have been hard to handle, all the new
Yeah,
era. Yeah.
it's just and for Nestle across 24 time zones, and that's all of them.
Yeah.
And then everything with social media and interconnectedness, it's just like throwing gasoline on a fire. It's
Yeah.
not only do things spread, but they spread as quickly as Wi-Fi and fiber optic cable will let them spread, which is pretty fast.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's even more complicated than it was previously, which is, it would have been hard to believe that in 1985 or 1995 that it could, I don't want to say worse, but just get more complicated, but
Yeah, for sure.
it's
Faster.
multitudes more. Yep. And we thought it was pretty bad back then.
Yeah,
But yeah, this is something.
yeah, for sure.
That's a good point. Let's see. So planning, organizing, leading, controlling. We talked a little bit about leading.
Hmm.
I'm extroverted for the most part. And I only say that because one of my areas of interest really is controlling and the quantitative side. And controlling doesn't always have to be quantitative, but usually we think about putting structure with policy and procedures and rules in a good way in place to help the company run consistently. So you think about a Nestle. My father worked for DuPont for almost 40 years. It was the only company he ever pulled a paycheck from. And they were also obviously still are global with, you get to 10,000 up to 100,000 employees. You wonder, how do they still manage everything structurally and keep it all tightly wound and still manage to make a profit somehow when you've got that many people
Hmm.
around the world all working hopefully towards roughly the same goals and objectives. And controlling is really the piece that keeps it all glued together because at a really micro level. It tells everybody what they need to be doing, what their actual goals and objectives are in doing it, even just in the moment. And then it helps us measure, it's called different things, but we measure the gap between what actually happens and what we had set as a goal or an objective. And it creates what's called a management inception report, or an inception report for short, and tells us, hey, this was off. And it may be something small that doesn't matter, and we see the report and don't think about it. It may be something big that can be the precursor to something serious starting to happen where we or somebody can notice it and take action.
Hmm.
But the whole idea that a company as big as Nestle or DuPont is held together by that controlling function. And controlling kind of has a bad reputation. When we say that about a person, it's usually a bad thing. Um, I don't like Bob's girlfriend. I don't know why I made it be a girlfriend, but Bob's girlfriend, she's really controlling, or Bob's really controlling. And it's not meant as a compliment, but organizationally, it's great. Um,
Yeah.
the only downside is it can stifle creative people who want to do different things. And as they always say, the cliche, want to draw outside the lines. And it's true. It's the controlling function tends to kind of dampen that because we think we know what we're looking for and we think we know the best way to get it done. And that's what the whole organizational structure is focused at through controlling.
Well, so controlling's becoming it's less as I read, it's less effective now. They're giving more power to the workers in some environments
Yep.
nowadays.
No, that's true. And trying to push the authority, I hate to say up and down because it sounds kind of prejudicial, but it's pushing the authority down from higher level managers to mid managers down to the employees that are actually interacting with whoever our customers are.
Yeah, trying to empower the employees probably more.
Exactly. And it's been a kind of a tug of war for a good 20 years now because it goes back to my hotel management times of how much do you empower employees and why should they care if you do?
Mhm.
Some employees love it when you do that and they get excited and they become better employees. Other ones will tell you point blank, they want to come to work, do what they're supposed to do for 40 hours a week and go home, and they don't want to have to be the decision maker on the fly.
Yeah.
So it's hard because the fact you're in college means that you're curious and you want to learn and try new things. And on the same way, I think most of us are, especially in business. But there are people that just, unless you're going to pay me a whole lot more to make those decisions for you, then I don't want that extra. I don't want the empowerment. I don't want the extra responsibility. Give it to somebody else. Just let me come to work.
Yeah, they just want to clock in and clock out, I guess.
Yeah.
But so I mean, I think that's depending on what type of job it is too, how much power you would give your uh, employees, don't you think?
No, it's true.
Yeah.
Because is it something where they could, what's the worst thing that could happen and what's the best thing that could happen by empowering them? And if the downside is something that's really serious and critical, then we may not want to do that with all employees all the time.
Yeah.
I'll give an example on the empowerment, at least from the hotel industry. And the numbers actually gone up a little bit, but Ritz-Carlton is a pretty good hotel chain and small, but they're great at what they do. They empowered all their employees, and this is still in place, but any employee, there's not a limit to it, any employee who encounters a guest who is unhappy can spend up to $1,000, and not necessarily in credits or free stuff at the hotel, but they can spend $1,000 outside the hotel to make the to make the customer happy again. And it's every single employee, and they know that they'll have to explain what they saw and why they thought it needed to be done, and then what the outcome was. But it's been in place for over a decade now. And they really closer to 2, and they haven't backed off of it at all. They say it works, and they don't necessarily go right out and spend $1,000, but they start to think, what could I do for this guest that'll make them happy? And at $1,000, it's not exactly the sky's the limit, but in that moment, it's pretty close to it.
Yeah. So
yeah,
that's a lot of trust they're putting in their employees.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely,
for sure.
Yep. And that's the kind of company it is. Internally, their motto is, "We are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen."
Yeah, I think I read that in the textbook or somewhere.
Yeah, it sounds like something out of Downton Abbey, but yeah, the type of customer they have, it's they pride themselves on the type of customer they have, but that their employees can be just as good for that customer if they're well chosen and well trained.
Yeah. So would that would be an involvement type of there's adaptability, involvement, and I'm forgetting the other two.
Yeah, no, that would be, and it would be adaptability, because it's got that agility kind of edge to it, and involvement too. You're right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so what they do then in terms of controlling is they being Ritz-Carlton, they look at controlling differently, where in the moment, every employee and manager has a lot of latitude to act. And so they write their policies, procedures, and rules around that, where they have that option at any given time. But the rest of the time, here's what we need you to do, and here's what we expect the outcomes to be. So it's most of the time, and apparently the employee, I just always call it the $1,000 rule. It doesn't come up nearly as often as we all might think it would, because they're really well-run hotels. And for someone to run into a guest who's that upset, apparently is fairly unlikely. Not to go off on a sidebar, but there's in terms of quality assurance, and we'll get to that right at the end of the semester, but collecting data and using a lot of data to be able to tell us how well we're really doing, not how well we think we're doing, but to really be able to quantify it. There's companies that go after and try to win this American award called the Malcolm Baldrige Award. And it's the award for quality assurance in a really statistical driven way. And some really good companies have won it. Rarely does the same company win it twice, and only once has a service company rather than a manufacturing company won it, and they won it twice, and it was Ritz-Carlton.
Wow.
So they're that good and that precise in what they do, that the $1,000 rule's cool, and a lot of people know about it, so there's good word of mouth, but they're so good at their process already that it doesn't come up very often, because they're just so consistent in doing what they do. So it's kind of cool that they have both sides of that going, and it's one probably led to the other, in that their quality assurance is so outstanding at an award-winning level, the biggest award we have for it, that they felt pretty confident, I imagine, going out and saying, you can all spend up to $1,000, because they knew probably not going to happen very often, but if it does, we've got this in place to catch that one guest who everything happened to. instead of 100 other guests. Everything happened to this one poor guest,
Yeah.
and our housekeeper or our bellman can make it right for them
Yeah.
before they leave. So it just, it kind of all fits together for what they do.
Are they a worldwide hotel chain or just in America?
They're worldwide. It's the individual hotels are actually, I think, all franchise, so they all have independent owners.
Okay.
But there's a standard operating procedure system in place, and Ritz-Carlton sells that system to the franchisees along with the Ritz-Carlton name from the brand and marketing side as well. So that's what they get when they franchise as a Ritz-Carlton. And then they have to pass all the different tests that Ritz-Carlton has to allow them to be a franchisee, because it's just because they have the money, it's not a given.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're not as big as they used to be, but they've still, I'm going to guess and say they've got between 50 and 100 hotels around the world.
Yeah. No, I've seen, I've like had lunch at the one in LA here. The nice hotel.
Yeah, very nice. Yep. Pretty amazing what they do.
Yeah.
And that they can keep doing it. Yeah.
For sure.
So that's controlling. The planning and organizing. I've gotten into it a little bit in the strategy chapter, I will. Before we actually start strategic planning, we've got to do a lot of analysis on what's going on in the what we call the external environment, but kind of the macro world. So we're looking at all of these major forces, like right now, global trade and free trade versus tariffs and God, there's a word that just escaped me. Tariffs, and because I haven't heard it in so long now.
Yeah.
I'm going to circle back to that. But free trade versus more protective trade, and there's arguments for both. Neither one's right or wrong. It's a little bit of a balance between the two usually. But there's all those macro environmental forces. And then closer to our company, there's our competitors, our customers, our suppliers, I say customers already, the threat of new entrants from outside, and the threat of substitute products. There's all those things really close to us in what we do that we kind of think of as the micro environment. We have to look at all that. And usually it's a consistent thing that happens on an ongoing basis, but we write a business plan once a year. And that's usually it's written in the third fiscal quarter of the year. So late summer, early fall, we start working on it. It's usually done by Thanksgiving. I'm making this as American as I possibly could just by naming these holidays, but late summer, early fall, and then it's done by Thanksgiving. We send it to corporate and thinking at the business unit level. They give it the final approval, and that's our budget for 2019 at that point.
Okay.
Based on all that analysis that we did. But we're still doing that analysis as managers. We're still hearing new things and seeing new data every single day, and basically processing that for the next time we have to actually formally do that planning. And that's what all this is that planning function.
Yeah.
So we do it formally once a year. Most companies use a 3-year planning window. Some still use a 5. You had already mentioned about everything changing as quickly as it does now. It used to be the standard was 5, and some companies would do 10 years, which was pretty incredible. But now, just in the last 20 years, since technology's really improved, amazingly improved, it's really become 3 years has become the norm. 5 years, some companies do, but everybody questions really doing the 4th and 5th year, because imagine us trying to predict right now what on earth 2023 is going to look like.
Yeah.
And as fast as artificial intelligence is going, the Internet of Things, who knows?
Well, yeah,
I mean, literally.
The internal environment's just trying to keep up with the external. Like,
Yeah.
External's changing so quickly, it'd be hard to keep up. But I was thinking, like, I feel like the years go by and stuff, I feel like individual people are getting more empowered, like through social media and through just this external stuff going on and whatever. That probably has, because we were talking about how there's less controlling on people for managers. That's probably a reason why in the business world they're loosening up and giving the employees more power. I was thinking
No, that's a great point.
it's coming from the external environment.
Yeah. And that's what's shaking up higher ed too, I think, is the same dynamics. I think there was kind of well, I don't think, and it's not kind of, I'm sure it's true. There was kind of a grip on knowledge and information for the last 1,000 years. People who were highly skilled had those skills, and other than an apprentice, a master and apprentice type of system where you would teach a person how to do it or a couple of people, other than that, it was tightly held because that's kind of where their power came from and their economic value. And now, because of primarily the internet, we all have access to how to do just everything. If we want to take the time to learn it, and that's what's going to shake up higher ed so much, is somebody somewhere, it doesn't have to be in a developing country, it could be in Tennessee for all it matters. But if they go online and diligently study and learn all about business and have the same or more knowledge as a graduate of a university like us or Vanderbilt or Memphis, then what's the difference in the big scheme of things? They don't have their ticket punched in terms of the diploma, but if they know what college graduates know, then aren't they just as valuable?
Yeah.
And the world's not ready for that yet, but it's coming. And I don't know how we'll discern between the two to who really knows what and can prove that they do. But, it not everything has to be learned at UT. Like the things you're learning this summer in Los Angeles, we couldn't teach them to start with, but it would be unlikely that we even would. But you're going to learn all those things and come back a different person and a different professional and a different student just because of the way you spent the summer and where you spent the summer.
Yeah.
And that's valuable, but it wasn't on anybody's syllabus here, and it wasn't in a textbook. You went and did it. So it's the same kind of thing that's really becoming democratized, knowledge and information in a way that it never has been before.
Well, yeah,
So cool stuff.
Competition's growing, and I was reading this book, this 48 Laws of Power. My uncle told me to read it. I don't know if you've read it at all.
I have not. I've heard of it though.
But it's kind of a interesting book. But I read the first chapter. It was talking about, like you said, how the managers or CEOs or whatever would tightly hold on to information. In the first chapter I read of the book, it said, try not to outshine your manager, your CEO. I thought it was just interesting, because everyone has their own insecurities. So that kind of just tied to like why, it's getting more competitive now, but, bosses, CEOs, they'll still, they don't want to be outshined by their, workers, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, they're still human.
Yeah, they're still human. So, but I just thought that was an interesting thing. Like
that really is, because it's counterintuitive to what we normally think, especially about CEOs, that they want to see the best and the brightest coming up. But like anybody else, they don't really see it at their own expense. They don't
want to lose their job,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I was going to say something flippantly. It's true sometimes, but I was going to say there's nothing more paranoid than a CEO anyway. It depends on the company, but they can be a pretty jumpy bunch.
Sure.
I've seen some that were just so confident in what they were doing and where the company was going, even when it wasn't necessarily going well, that they seemed pretty hard to rattle. And some of them got us through some really hard times.